We're going to talk about a prep question for students who are applying to Yonsei and Koryo universities or any of those universities of that liking. Now, so this is a very famous problem, or I guess philosophical questions, dealing with utilitarianism. So just to recap, for students who didn't get to read, so there's a trolley running, and you have a choice to save, or the trolley is going straight, and it's going to hit 5 people for whatever reason that they can't move, right? And you are luckily you're in front of a lever, and if you switch the lever, you get to kill 1 person and save 5 in which you do it. And this is actually a very famous problem because of the AI-driven cars, as given in question 2, the passage 2. But it's also a famous one because a famous book, Justice, by Michael J. Sandel, professor at Harvard. This is, I think, the first. He talks about this conundrum in the very first lecture, and he asks the student what he's going to do, and with it, he introduces Jeremy Bentham and the great utilitarian philosopher. So, jumping right to the problem, is sacrificing 1 life for 5 ethical? So, if a student is to answer a question like this, what would be the first step?
Well, luckily for them, this was actually a whole year of my university studies was devoted to this kind of thing, but my first year actually. And even the first class, I seem to remember this problem being used as their sort of quintessential philosophical or ethical problem that we were supposed to solve on, like, I think it was maybe our first day or first week. And as with any philosophical problem, I would first of all talk about clarifying the terms in the question.
Okay.
So the question is sacrificing one life for 5 ethical? Well, the quintessential philosophical question is, what is ethical? Right. You mentioned before about Jeremy Bentham and utilitarianism. That is one way of answering that question, right? What is ethical? We talk about utilitarianism being, I seem to remember Bentham saying that the greatest pleasure for the greatest number, the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Right. Meaning, obviously, in his view, we should save the 5, right? We should kill the 1 and save the 5. But that's one way of answering the question, what is it to be ethical? What does ethical mean in this question? But of course, there are other ways too, you know? Not everyone thinks in that kind of consequentialist manner. Right. And by consequentialist, I mean the consequences of my actions are the only thing that we would use to determine whether my actions were ethical or not. Okay. But there are other people too, you know, the people like Kant or whoever who would say, actually, no, it's not the consequences of my actions. It's the actions themselves which are right or wrong. Right. So you would have to first set up some kind of, answering of that question. Okay. One of the ways that I teach my students when they have to tackle a philosophical question is try to look for the opposite idea. So if there's an idea that is opposite to utilitarianism, what would that be? It's a very like devil's advocate kind of view, right? The Socratic method. So an opposite of utilitarianism in this sense would be a deontological approach to ethics. Deon sort of coming roughly from, I think, the word duty. Right. And in that kind of sort of virtue ethics, it's kind of taken as given that it's the rightness and the wrongness of any given action is in the act itself. Right. So I could try and save you, and if I failed, I still did the right thing. Right. You know what I mean? That kind of idea. So or I could try and save you, kill 5 people by mistake, and they would say, oh, it's okay, you tried. You did the right thing. Whereas a utilitarianist would say, you killed 5 people. Okay. So utilitarian will only look at the results, whereas the deontological people would look at the steps taken. Yeah, the process, the actual act itself. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So maybe they could mention deontological and utilitarianism. I think it's important if a student has to answer for questions like this to mention that they know such concepts, just to know that a student has been prepped for something like this. Now, however, but the student still has to give an answer. Is sacrificing 1 life for 5 ethical?
What might be a good approach to that, answering this question?
I mean, it depends how they feel, right?
Right.
It depends because you have this sort of utilitarian idea of we need to save the most people, the most lives. And then you may come from a sort of more deontological approach of, no, you just need to do the right thing. But
what is the right thing here? I mean, that is the question, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And it would depend on your own moral compass because intuition plays into this too.
Right.
We may not consider ourselves a strict utilitarian, but our intuition may tell us, I should save the 5, even if I'm not sure why. Or I may be religious, right? And that would be another kind of form of deontology or that kind of virtue ethics.
Right. And it's funny because I have used this question with many students, and rarely do they actually say, okay, who's the one guy and who's the other 5? And of course, the question does limit our knowledge because we're far away from the trolley, and we can only switch it, and we have no idea who's that one person is going to be and who's the 5 people going to be. But is it wrong to ask who? Okay, that depends who's that one person and who's that 5.
Well, I remember in my university courses, it was split up into applied ethics and then what was known as sort of metaphysics, like the philosophy of ethics. In the philosophical aspect, people were urged not to ask those questions, but in an applied ethics setting, those were the important details.
Now, I think it's good to, because metaphysic or metaphysical, that's one term that students often get confused, and students don't often look up what that actually means. So what is a definition to that?
So when I would be talking like the sort of the metaphysics of it, it would just be, in a very simple way, the conceptual idea. There's one person. We don't know if they're old or young, and then there's 5 people here. They're just concepts. Right. We're not talking, there's John. That's your friend John.
Right.
And there's 5 really, really old people about to die over there.
Right.
Like that would be more of an applied ethics. These are physical specifics. Whereas a more metaphysical approach would be just more conceptual. Not actual circumstances, just possibilities, hypotheticals.
Okay. All right. So so in this case, the students will have to feel for, okay, is it 5? So in the end, it's the personal ideal that has to lead the question. Now, then moving on, how does the question change when it involves actually pushing a large guy?
So that's the second one, isn't it?
So it has to do with commitment, huh?
I think
committing the act.
Yeah, right. So I think for that's an interesting point, right? That's why they posed. It's called the fat man argument. That's why they originally posed the fat man argument, because to a utilitarian, that doesn't actually make a difference if you think about it, because the consequence is the same.
Right.
If you push him or pull a lever, it doesn't matter. Whereas to a virtue ethicist or a deontological approach, that is completely different.
Right.
If I pull a lever and if I actually physically push that person, that's different.
Right.
So if you were coming from a more utilitarian approach, i.e. 5 lives are more valuable than 1, doesn't matter to you at all. It makes no difference.
Okay. But, yes. I do, a question just popped in my head. So let's say, what should a leader be like? Should a leader, like a president, should president, because it's written in the Constitution, all men are equal, right? So under that circumstance, 5 lives is going to be better than 1 life. So do we write the political constitutions in utilitarianism, or?
Again, that comes down to your personal preference. If you were a very religious person, you might say, absolutely not. That's the last thing we want, is just some benevolent machine ruling our society. And because that might lead to other situations. Like here we have the trolley problem and then the fat man problem. But several decades later, people came up with other ones. Maybe they've heard of the organ problem. There's one there's one sick person who needs an organ transplant. No, there's 5 sick people, who need organ transplants. And there's one perfectly healthy person. Is it okay to just harvest that person when they did nothing wrong to save these 5 people? That's the next problem. So, I mean, personally, I lean to a more utilitarian approach. But would I want our leaders to be like that entirely? I don't think so. I think there's something intrinsically important about human life.
That's a good point. Yeah. Now, so in this case, the extended problem. So when you commit, it's more of a test, isn't it?
Yeah, of course.
So if you pose to be a utilitarian, are you still going to be a utilitarian even if it's clearly you who's making that decision to push that person?
The blood is on your hands, so to speak.
And may I say, legally, you still committed the act of killing that one person if you switch the lever,
Indeed,
right?
yeah.
And that should be considered the same as pushing the guy to the train.
Yeah, and that is actually an interesting facet of our law, right? In some circumstances, law is purely consequentialist. But if you think about murder, we have first-degree murder, manslaughter. Those are not utilitarian outcomes. They are based on what you intended to do.
That's a fascinating point.
Yeah, so that's our law is not purely utilitarian, and that could be an argument that students might want to use. You know that the current system that we have is not utilitarian. So that would be a drastic departure from our current way of life if that were something that they were to propose.
That's an amazing point. Okay. I also wanted to add quickly that a lot of people, I've actually heard even elementary students reading a question like this and being put into a debate. But when they do, they introduce this question as, what would you do when both outcomes are lousy, right? So anyway, moving on to the passage 2.
Just a quick point.
Yes.
Sorry to interject
No.
there. You said elementary students. There are even, you can even look on YouTube and find 2, 3, 4-year-olds with those little kid blocks and having the question posed to them that way.
Right.
There's 5 people here, 1 person, and then see what they do. You can actually look that up today and find it out.
That's
it's
cool.
really interesting.
All right. So moving on to the MIT Media Lab. Death toll that human-operated cars deliver every year. And now moving on, and consider that we have all read this, discuss how a decision by self-driving car may be fundamentally different from that of humans when it comes to track-based trolley problem. So how should it be different when it's a machine thinking?
Yeah, so with the machine case, we get the opportunity to, if we are utilitarians,
right,
logically, but we feel a little uncomfortable with some of the decisions that would have to be made on that basis, like the organ problem, the fat man problem, and also the self-driving cars problems. You could look at it 2 ways. You could look at it as this is going to be unacceptable, right? Or an opportunity for us to act in a way that we wish we could if we were morally and ethically rational. Because we're not always rational. And maybe if there was 1 baby in the street and 2 really, really old people on the left, nobody would want to say, just get the old people, you know? Right. But if we were 100% morally rational, we might say, swerve off the road and kill those 2. Right? And those kind of decisions make us very uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. It's very similar. I think that the automated cars argument is very similar to the organ argument in the sense that this is just an innocent bystander. Because we're saying the car should actually swerve off the road onto the pavement and kill someone else as a calculated decision to avoid killing, 5 people in the road or whatever.
Right.
Really uncomfortable questions.
Right. Another thing to consider is this is a self-driving car. So it's going to be, it's going to make decisions by its, like you said, calculated ways or programmed ways. So also another way to look at this is how, how is it going to be programmed, or how will a program look at certain situations, like a trolley, something that is similar of the trolley situation. And as I've said about the first passage, maybe we should consider that, maybe we should make it clear that we're going to be utilitarian when it comes to the law or when it comes to the AI thinking. I quote, when I was teaching this class earlier, I used to quote that one of the barriers, I guess, one of the shortcomings of an AI, the reason why we shouldn't consider it to be a good thinker is that it cannot function under 2 contrasting ideas. Now, Scott Fitzgerald, the writer of the book The Great Gatsby, he said that the test of first-rate intelligence is to see if that person could function under 2 contrasting ideas. And I remember watching another TED lecture where he talks about an AI butler. The parents gave the AI butler two commands, basically. One, children should never be hungry, and B, you can never leave the house. And it happens so that parents are gone and there's two kids in the house and they say they're starving, and the AI butler opens up the refrigerator and there's no food, and then the family cat goes by. And basically we're leading people to say, okay, the machine's going to cook the cat, right? Now, I've also done it myself that I tell my daughter and my son not to tell a lie, but then again, when I'm in a situation where I have to leave my daughter alone, I'll tell her, okay, when somebody comes, act like someone's around, right? So under that circumstance, my daughter's still functions, right?
Yeah, right.
She knows she shouldn't lie, but under special circumstances. But then the thing about AI is we can't define every special circumstance, because the minute we do that, all the special circumstances won't be special anymore.
It lacks that flexibility of the human
mind.
Right.
So, we sort of demonstrated that without flexibility, the question one cannot be really answered. Right, and that flexibility comes from your own moral standing and your ability to reason. But with question two, AI can't be flexible by I guess fundamentally. No?
And that could be, depending on your philosophical standpoint, a feature, like a positive, a good thing. We don't want it because let's say you're a completely utilitarian thinker. That flexibility is a weakness of the human psyche. It's an actual irrationality on our part. Okay. And then AI presents us with the opportunity to overcome our own irrationality, which to them would be a good thing.
Okay.
Whereas if you came at it from maybe a more religious point of view or just a pragmatic point of view, then you would say like that it's just not flexible enough. And that flexibility is an inherent strength of human beings. So again, it would always come down to which side you fell on philosophically.
Right. And I think, hearing you, I also came up with House of Scorpions.
Yeah.
I think somewhere in the book it says, why would you think that clones are going to be any inferior than you, right? And we could go back to, I guess, the verse in the Bible that when God created humans, He created us modeling Himself, right? So that's why a lot of religious people will say that we are the representation of God, and likely so, AI is going to be a representation of who we are and how we think, right? So maybe we shouldn't really think that. And I'm I guess correcting myself, but we shouldn't really think that AI is going to be any lesser of thinker, or by being fully utilitarian, it's going to make any cause any more of problems, or maybe it could solve more because it's so rigid
and so like efficient and unfaltering. Yeah, but then there are always those cases, and maybe that would be just a case of again, our irrationality, our public outcries. When these self-driving cars maybe reduce the rate of death by hundreds of percent points, However, that one time when it makes a decision that we find questionable, there will be complete outrage. But I mean, philosophically, I'm not sure if that's relevant.
Okay. So, how decision by a self-driving car may be fundamentally different, the question asks, right, from humans. I guess if I were to answer this question, I guess I would concentrate my answer to being AI cannot be flexible in its own decision-making process because it's following an algorithm, right? And that could be predicted, no matter how smart a machine can be. And I might add to qualify my answer that it is, although we could think that maybe because it cannot be rigid, it could do things more efficiently. But however, we can't really say that AI. I still don't see any real possibility how AI could be, more tricking or more flexible than humans.
Yeah, and it definitely lacks that intuition
that
we have. We were faced with a problem like the trolley problem, and most of us will proffer an answer immediately,
Right.
and then we'll scramble for whatever philosophical position we can find that backs that up. You know, the intuition of what is right and wrong, in my experience, tends to come before whatever philosophical or conceptual framework you use to justify it.
Right.
And the AI lacks that, you know, which is maybe why the MIT decided to conduct the study the way they did. They went out and asked a load of people,
Right.
what are your intuitions on these subjects? And that's what they're using as the basis for the decision making of the AI.
Right.
So it may be a wise way of going about it. It may be foolish.
Do you think, let's say, I'm quoting a lot of things today, but remember Titanic in the movie when the ship is about to sink, somebody yells, "Women and children first."
Right.
So, when do you think there's going to be a difference in criticism when a person swerves the car and kills an old lady instead of two young babies, versus when the machine does it? Do you think there'll be a difference in criticism?
I think there probably will be. I think we'll see a massive, and this is a more practical response, but I think we're going to see a massive reduction in deaths,
Right.
and a massive increase in the amount of outcry and outrage in specific incidents of death. But that may not be a bad thing. That might just help us refine the algorithm by which the computer decides
Right.
who lives and who dies, basically.
Now, another interesting thing to think about is, what if the driver, because it's a self-driving car, but
Yes.
the car will not be driven unless there's someone in there going place,
Yeah.
right? Going places. So if it's an old lady in the car, will the car be programmed to kill the driver or the people in the back seat
Yeah.
to save the young people?
Yeah, we're going to have to write all those rules in, right?
Right.
If X, then Y, right? If the person who is about to be killed is of so many years younger than the person who's in the car or the other option,
Right.
then it's going to have to choose which age group do I kill, which gender. Do we kill a man before a woman? Do we kill a woman?
Right.
Is it going to be neutral on those issues? And also, who decides that? I mean, they have a essentially crowdsourced answer to that question.
Right.
But yeah, that's a tricky one. Yeah.
And crowdsourced answer doesn't really make it right. It's just
we found that with the Nazis, right? It's just because a lot of people decided one way was right, that doesn't make it right. So
Right.
that's why question one is so important. Like, what is that right? What is right and wrong in that sense?
could we? You said computers can make calculated decisions, and I think people seem to think that the amount of thinking, amount of I guess calculation a computer can perform in a split-second decision will be more accurate than humans. Now, can we call computers' split-second decision to be more calculated than humans? Humans split-second decision?
I think we can answer that question two ways. I think the first way would be no, because just the sheer computing power of the human brain,
Right.
the amount of information that we can process unconsciously as well as consciously is maybe higher. But let's say feasibly that the computer, becomes sufficiently advanced to which it can take in more information and make a better decision. My second answer to that question would be, well, has any decision ever been made by a computer, or was that decision made years ago when it was programmed by a human? Like, I would actually argue that there's no computer that ever made a decision. The computer just carried out the decision made by whatever human made it.
Right.
I would say decision making is a fundamentally human act, and that the computer is just running a rule set that makes it take a certain course of action. But that rule set was designed by humans, and so they essentially made that decision. It just didn't happen until later.
That's a great point, and may I say that's also one way to answer this question in a very, very nice way. Because a lot of people will say that the way computer or AI is going to make a decision is going to be different than how people do it. But you're saying that any decision an AI or a computer made has been made by people anyway, so there's no fundamental difference in there.
Yeah. It's just a tool by which a decision is carried out. I would argue.
Good point. Okay. All right, let's move on to question 3, the last question. It says, if you were a self-driving car designer, how would you program the self-driving cars to react in difficult ethical situations and help people benefit from the profound change that the self-driving cars will bring about? And you must address the difference between human being and the self. Now, once again, the question sort of forces the student to think about, to talk about, the fact that it's going to be different, the way human makes decisions and the way machines going to make decisions.
And in a practical sense, that's correct, right?
I guess so.
It is different in a practical sense. If I was to come about this, my kind of viewing on this, my viewpoint on this question is, like I said before, it leans towards the utilitarian. Just save the most number of lives. Right. And I would even go so far as to say younger lives would count more than older lives, that kind of thing, And
that's terrible in a way, because then, because a machine is going to make that split-second decision, but then a guy who's about to get hit is going to make that split-second realization. Oh shoot! It's coming to me.
You've been chosen.
I've been chosen to die. Someone has to die, and that's going to be me, because over there, there's a 5-year-old kid or a pregnant woman.
And he did nothing to deserve that.
Yeah.
But isn't that the sort of the fundamental unfairness of the universe? And we as, sacks of meat, trying to reckon with that,
Right.
I don't think there's ever going to be any perfectly moral decision. The best we can do, this is my point of view, the best we can do is just save as many people as possible, just protect life as much as possible. And it's kind of ironic, or amusing at least, that the course of action that leads us to protect the largest amount of life,
right?
The most life-preserving philosophy also seems the most cold and the most calculated and the most machine-like, which is utilitarianism, It's kind of amusing.
Interesting. Okay. How would you program? So you would lean towards utilitarian. Now, if we were to go in the other way, deontological, what would be the way?
I don't even know. I'm not sure how you could.
Because I also don't see any way to program the machine to say, okay, it's going to be 10-point system, and under that circumstance, a pregnant lady is going to get the highest point. I think, right? And an old man, somehow the old male is going to get the lowest.
Yeah.
But then, maybe if we delve deeper with the ontological aspect of it, maybe we might even do it in a way that, okay, now president's going to get 11 points. For those 4 or 5 years that he's going to serve as the president, commander-in-chief gets 11 points somehow, right? And that's going to be preposterous. I don't see any way it could be written in the ontological.
I don't either. But
now, I think one thing that stayed in my mind about this question is can we? So if there's an accident, and for whatever reason, a lawyer came up with the idea that, okay, that calculation was completely wrong, right? Can a machine's decision be accused?
Well, that kind of takes us back to my point before, right?
Right.
If that situation did occur and there was an error in the calculation, you wouldn't sue the machine, right? You would sue the human that made it.
Right.
The responsibility at the end of the day has to fall on the shoulders of a human, because they're the only ones capable, philosophically speaking, of making an actual decision. Right. But it's kind of, it's going back to what you said before about scoring points, based on, but I don't see how you could actually machines don't function in the world of deontology, of virtue, of the intrinsic rightness of various actions.
Right.
Computers deal in consequences and measurable differences between various physical things, right?
And in a way, even those measures are human aspects, not machines. By nature, AIs or machines going to be morally neutral in every aspect. It should be, or supposed to be.
But in that situation where you've got a trolley problem, there is no moral neutrality, right? Someone has to die. And your neutrality means that 5 die. That's not neutral, right?
Right, because neutral in this case would be indecision, not doing
right.
anything.
And indecision is a decision in itself. Like, you know, like. But getting it back to the question, it says, you must adjust the difference between human being and the self-driving cars in relation to the moral decision-making process. Well, I mean, philosophically, we might start to even undermine this question, you know. But I feel like one of my strategies, and this is for the students, one of my strategies in college was always question the question, but always answer the question thoroughly.
Right.
So in this sense, I would give both sides, and also question the question, you know, the terms in the question. So you're actually giving almost like a double answer.
Right.
You're not giving less of an answer because you're questioning the question. You're actually giving an even more thorough answer than was even expected of you, and that. I mean, that served me well in a philosophy course.
Right. And I think being bold enough to say that there's no fundamental difference between human decision and machine decision, I think that could also be, you know, bold. But if you could work it out, I mean, that's going to be a great answer because not that many students are going to have courage or intuition to really answer that way.
And you would be actually including all the information that those other students included,
right.
But an extra layer of sophistication that maybe they hadn't thought about.
Good. Now, if a student would like to study about these philosophical ideas, obviously a student might read Jeremy Bentham, but which other philosophers or which other ideas should he or she?
Well, it's kind of going a bit of a way back now since I was in university, but I remember that the original, the guy who basically thought up utilitarianism was Jeremy Bentham. Right. But I think there's been some way more famous, more modern, more contemporary proponents. John Stuart Mill with his book Utility. Was it Utility or Utilitarianism? That's been a huge influence on American culture, American society, and thought. Even more contemporary would be what's his name? Peter Singer. Peter Singer.
Yeah.
He's a famous.
He's still alive.
Yeah, he's a really famous utilitarian.
Right.
His work has been more in the field of animal welfare and things like this, but it's still very much the same questions, but with a different.
And we will one day talk about, because he talks about how it might be philosophically or morally wrong to eat sentient animals.
Right.
So maybe we'll come back to that. Come back to him. I love Peter Singer's writing. I've always
interesting. I had to study him in university. For deontology, I mean the most famous one is obviously Immanuel Kant. But reading Kant is a huge undertaking, not to be taken lightly. Sorry. Other deontologists, I mean, any prominent religious figure would probably fall under that umbrella term as well.
Okay. So most religious ideas are based on deontology?
Yeah, usually, yeah. There's some kind of intrinsic, the scriptures usually say there's some kind of intrinsic rightness or wrongness about actions.
I'm going to throw this question and then we should wrap up. But it's funny, speaking of deontology along with religion, because... I guess even religion, when you die, when you go to hell or heaven, right? You don't go to hell specifically because you killed 5 people. And I remember even in I guess I might be wrong, but Christianity, even if you had done heinous things, if you committed a self-sacrificial act and really gave yourself, and by that, if you I guess committed yourself,
sins,
right? Then you reach an atonement.
Yeah, and actually, maybe to take it away from the sensitive topic of religion, the recent movie, the Korean movie, 신과 함께, Together with the Gods, I think was the English title. The guy in that movie, we think at first that he's a saint, and then as the movie progresses, we realize, you've actually done some pretty bad things. But then as the movie progresses further, you realize that he did all those things for good reasons. And so at the end, we kind of have this kind of atonement of him at the end of the movie. And he's now said to be a good person. But the roller coaster of the movie is he a good person? Is he a terrible person? And it's kind of this idea, this deontological idea of, well, what did he mean when he did those things?
In a way, it's a revolving idea of Lucifer used to be the number one disciple of God and then turned into a devil. And
Yeah. That movie made me cry on a plane, by the way.
All right, cool. Yeah, I think this will be a real big help to the students, and
I hope so.
yeah, I really enjoyed talking about this.
Excellent.
Cool. All right, thank you.
Done.